So the next session is going to segue nicely, talk about regional and remote area issues, and I would like to slowly welcome to the stage Erin Coldham, who is the Chief Development Officer from Star of the South, Liz Ritchie, Chief Executive Officer from the Regional Australia Institute, and then joining us online shortly will be Paul Dobing, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Developing East Arnhem Limited, and Stephen Harding, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Shire of East Pilbara. And just give us a moment and we'll be set and jump into Pigeonhole. Just give me a moment, I'll wait for our colleagues to join us online. There we go. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Liz, I'm going to start with you, given the breadth of your portfolio, so to speak. What do you think are the most significant opportunities and barriers to implementing the infrastructure projects we need in regional and remote areas? And how do you think we can get better outcomes through greater collaboration? And obviously quite a few ideas from the previous panel sessions, but why don't you open us up with that small question?
Very small question. Well, thank you, Melinda, and it's great to be here for such an important discussion today. Look, perhaps just to quickly set the scene, the Regional Australia Institute is also a national think tank dedicated to rural and regional issues. And, to really go to the heart of the issues facing regional communities and, our nation at large is that we are experiencing a major economic and social transformation in this country right now. And so there are many factors that contribute to that transition, and many of those factors we've discussed this morning. Let me start with population. I mean, right now, we continue to see this record move to rural and regional communities. You only need to look at, the last census period to see that we had a net gain of almost 170,000 people moving to our regional and rural communities. That was 3 times the level of numbers that we saw in the previous census. But what's really interesting about those numbers, and I know for Claire and the data geeks in the room, I'm sure there's many, please go to our website. The greatest shift we've seen is in our age group. The millennials are the greatest movers. And this is really exciting when it comes to that transformation that we're seeing in our rural and regional communities. But what this has created are growing pains. And so, that wasn't foreshadowed. Nobody could have foreshadowed the pandemic. And so whilst regional communities, and I know there'll be many probably in the room and watching, have very much called for greater population growth, they're now experiencing and also having to manage and often pay for those growing pains, whether it be housing, whether it be what I call social and soft infrastructure in relation to their healthcare, their education and their community services. So, you couldn't have foreshadowed that, but what we need to do is really play catch up. Sitting alongside that population issue and opportunity, as I see it, is the record number of jobs vacancies in rural and regional communities, and all of the panels have mentioned this. The dearth of skills that we have across our rural and regional communities, even though we've got record numbers moving, and even though those people who are moving are professionally skilled people. The majority of those jobs are professional, highly skilled roles. So this is, again, speaks to the transition that we're making because, regional communities are becoming much more sophisticated than they were 5, 10 years ago, and the demographic is shifting enormously. So when it comes to a topic like infrastructure, it's so important that we have a holistic plan, and something that the Institute has been calling for and working on with with government, with industry and with our local communities through our regionalisation ambition, which is a 10-year plan to rebalance the nation, is ensuring that we can see a national population and settlement plan. And that isn't just about where population lives, although that's really important, getting that settlement piece. It's about what are all the factors that surround that community prosperity. So what are the jobs of today? What are the jobs of tomorrow? Where is the investment pipeline going? And I loved the Minister's comment about the corridor and ensuring that we can optimise where current investment pipeline is already being allocated. It can be done. You can also shape in then the housing that's required and all of the social infrastructure that's required. So you can't talk about hard infrastructure today without thinking about the soft infrastructure that regional communities absolutely need. So I might stop there.
Yeah, the social infrastructure agenda is equally important. I'm going to come back to you with another question, but I might bring Paul in. Welcome, Paul. Bring one of our online speakers into the mix. Paul, wondering if you could share with our audience, some of whom may not be familiar with your organisation, a little bit about the core mission of developing East Arnhem and your role in shaping the future of the region in terms of economic development and the importance of infrastructure for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. I wanted to start by just acknowledging I'm calling in from Nhulunbuy up in East Arnhem, which is on Yolngu country and on the Go Peninsula, so the clans of the Gumatj, Ruatingu and Galpu, and also extend that across to all of the clans of the Lanapui homelands in East Arnhem and also Anandili over on Groot. So developing East Arnhem Limited, we're established by our founding members, Rio Tinto and the Northern Territory Government back in 2014, with a primary mission around helping to drive investment, economic development to smooth the transition from mining to a post-mining economy in the region. So we're about to enter a period in the next 5 to 10 years where bauxite operations on the Go Peninsula, organisations, government and investors to help try and create opportunities for investment, economic development. And obviously a big part of that, the conversation today, is also thinking about how can we support, advocate for, drive conversations about the infrastructure that's needed in a regional remote kind of setting such as ours. And it's interesting, actually, I was thinking about the previous minister's comments, about rain events and roads and the importance of that. I had actually planned to be out on one of our home plans and call into you. But for those that might be familiar, the Central Arnhem Road, which is about 640 odd kilometres that links Stewart Way to where we are, at the condition of the road and the weather events mean that, you can't actually get to homelands and communities. You can't do many of those things that you want to do. And so part of our role is working with others in things like advocacy, saying, OK, we've done some work at the moment to get, 350 million in funding secured, but at a roughly $1 million kilometre, we need another 200. We also do work in facilitation, project facilitation type work, so where we lead projects, as we're doing at the moment in partnership with traditional owners on creating opportunities in areas like aquaculture and investment, repurposing the current mining assets on the peninsula to potentially use those as new facilities for aquaculture, agriculture facilities and those kinds of work. We do direct investment work, so we actually use some of our capital towards telecommunications infrastructure, port infrastructure, and other things that are needed in the region. And we do promotion, which is, conversations like this are a good opportunity to bring awareness to an area like East Arnhem.
Thanks, Paul. We're having just a few problems with your Wi-Fi.
And I think
sorry, you're just breaking up a little bit there.
Fairly recently with Rio and others to... No.
Sorry, we're just losing you a little bit, so I might just pass to one of the others for a question, and we'll come back to you. I'm going to pick up one of the questions here in Pigeonhole. Start with you, Liz, and then segue to Erin, because it's, of course, the issue of decarbonisation, net zero, the transition, the important role of the regions in generating the power that we need. And so I think, Liz, the question for you is, what is the appetite and the engagement of community? We're hearing a lot about stakeholder engagement for this massive transition we're embarking upon. Where do they see themselves in it? And what are the issues that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. It's a great question. We've actually just launched the first of a series of our net towards net zero reports, and actually, contrary to what you might be reading, regional communities have told us clearly that they're very thirsty for more knowledge about where the opportunities lie for them in their community, and what is the flow-on effect that regional communities how can they work with industry, and how can they be part of, ensuring that we do meet net zero. I know it's a heavily politicised debate, and it's difficult to speak on behalf of everybody, and I wouldn't presume to do so. But there are definitely signs, and it's come through clearly in our research, that they need more information, they want more information, but they don't want things done to them. They want to be part of the discussion. They want to be involved and at the table from the beginning. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about, community engagement, better communication, better collaboration, creating trust. All of those facets are really, really important in getting to where we need to get to, because the landscape has changed, as I think we're all observing, and regional communities, and we work with regional communities, and we encourage them to understand their own value, that you have a value here and you need to come to the table and you need to negotiate and get the best outcome for your community. Now, that could look like a range of outcomes, and I guess to this room, infrastructure is vital, but it comes back to, I guess, people are at the centre of our work, and I'd really encourage you to get creative and to, open those lines of communication and understand what are the pain points for these communities. And when I mean pain points, probably what you're going to find is it's about their livability and the amenity. So that speaks to soft and social infrastructure. So, there's a way through here. There's a middle road that says you can have a win-win, ensure that we deliver on the hard infrastructure that we need to meet the energy demands, while also optimising this, once-in-a-generation investment to get and ensure that regional Australia has, the prosperity is a benefactor of the social dividend, and that there is a legacy for these regional communities.
Erin, why don't we bring you into the conversation? Perhaps start off by just telling the audience a little bit about what you guys are up to and what your priorities are.
Sure, yeah. So for those who don't know, Star of the South is an offshore wind project off the coast of Gippsland, and we are looking to progress offshore wind for this country in areas such as Gippsland and Hunter, traditional power generating industries. So I think to go to your earlier question, Melinda, what do people in those communities think and feel about this energy transformation and what it means for them at a local level? The shorter answer is it depends. Yeah. So it depends on the community, and I can tell you what people think and feel in the Latrobe Valley is different to what they think and feel in South Gippsland, in Port Stephens, in the Hunter, in Newcastle. So it's really different, and it goes to Liz's point around getting to understand those communities, and we've been doing a lot of work in that space. I think generally there is a trust deficit. We sort of understand that we need to kind of get into this new form of energy generation, but I would say we're starting at a point of trust deficit. So how do we build trust? We need to show up, we need to be there, we need to understand what those hopes and aspirations of those people are. And one example I can give is, early days, one of the first times I went down to Yarram in South Gippsland was, I learnt that it was the first time in 120 years that Yarram couldn't field a cricket team. So we know that sporting clubs are the lifeblood of some of these regional towns, and so that struck me. I thought 120 years and now they don't have enough people for a team. Why don't they have people? Because there's not jobs here. People move away to go and find jobs and opportunities. What do we need to do? We need to hire some local people. So one example I've got is Stella in our team. She's very active in the local football and netball club. The only reason she lives in Yarram, she moved back from Melbourne to Yarram to work on this project because there was an opportunity. So it's one example of understanding what do people want, how can you actually help them achieve that. And people know Stella's back because Star of the South gave her a job and she's contributing to our community. So maybe Star of the South's a good thing for us. And it really depends. It's about finding out what they need and then what you can do to actually contribute to those goals and aspirations.
So, hot topic this week. I'm not sure who asked the question in Pigeonhole, but I'm going to paraphrase your question if that's all right. Hot topic this week is the role of government in supporting these new industrial opportunities, these new green opportunities. How important is that to your organisation and what you're trying to achieve, and how are you working with government?
We can't do it one or the other. So I think the work that we do, it has to go hand in glove with what government's trying to achieve. When I started in this role, we didn't have any policies for the technology that we were looking to bring forward. Fast forward 5 years, we've had policies come into place at a federal and state level that's driven significant investment interest. In Gippsland, we had 37 licence applications from global companies wanting to put their capital into these projects and these areas because of the work that industry and government was doing together to achieve that common goal. There will be times where we might not agree on absolutely everything, but we do have a common shared goal about how we can deliver, which naturally aligns with community goals. And maybe if I can just touch on making the right decisions that aren't going to upset the government agenda. So I think there's probably work that we can do up front. And as I say, it's about understanding the needs of those communities, understanding the needs of and aspirations of traditional owners. So I think, we talk about that a lot, but what does that look like? We're very, humbled that we've got a good relationship with the Gunai-Kurnai people in Gippsland, but it's really taken about 6 years of relationship building on both sides to understand those aspirations before we start talking about now what's the offshore wind project going to look like and how do we actually transact on that. So I think for us there's a role to work together to achieve those outcomes, whether it's for the jobs piece, as I said earlier, traditional owner aspirations, getting energy into the grid because we've got a looming problem coming, or indeed getting some of those broader economic benefits flowing through those regions at an earlier stage that we can. So that's, I think, how we can do it and go fast and get that certainty we need.
Yeah, great. I'm going to come back to you later on with a question on community engagement. So for the audience, if there's anything specific that you have in your mind around the community engagement challenge and question, feel free to pop that in Pigeonhole. Stephen, I'm sorry for keeping you on the bench for as long as I have. So I'm going to come to you as the CEO of the Shire of East Pilbara, obviously a region that is resource rich. Massive infrastructure needs in the past. Really interested in your perspectives on how we can navigate these challenges, keep pace with the demands of industry, but also community where the populations can ebb and flow according to projects that are going on. But also, obviously, your perspectives on, the energy transition and what that's meaning for your region.
Yeah, okay. So firstly, if I can just give a sense of scale of our shire. So we're the largest shire in Australia. We are 33% bigger than Victoria. 3,158 kilometre gravel roads. So if you start talking about infrastructure, and you're right, in terms of the mining industry, we do every mineral you can think of coming out of our region. That means additional loading, and if I can talk about supporting of the community, so we've got 7,000 ratepayers, and we service over 45,000 people. when it comes to the pipe, and that in itself creates some constraints. So if you talk about the basic things that you need for economic growth, you need your roads to be okay. We have, triples and quads going down all of our roads, and I'm not talking about main roads, I'm talking about our Shire roads. And that is an issue. So we have 8 graders going full time, and we can never keep up. We did some numbers around that. We need, just for our gravel roads alone, we need about $196 million just to get the profile right. So I did notice one of the early speakers spoke about emergency events. We certainly experience that a lot. So we get the cyclone. If we don't get the cyclone, we get the tail end of that. So that has a really big impact on our road. I'm going to say that road infrastructure is a really big, or transport infrastructure is a really big one. I think land availability is another one. So we have the mining companies expanding. So if I was to use our airport as a measure, we had 370,000 people come through our airport. In the previous year, last year, it was 450,000 people. And that number is growing, and that's just based on the demand of mining. And hence, the dollars that go out of our region, is in excess of $40 million, $1 billion a year for companies. So infrastructure, if I was to talk about road infrastructure, that's one. Airport infrastructure is another. Just infrastructure for Newman Airport, we need to upgrade the airport 4.5 times its current size. So there's the $100 million. So where do we get that $100 million? So the challenge really is, how do you get government, private industry and local government to work together to get the dollars that are available or required to support this growth and increase that appeal for people to be in the region. Telecommunications is another area of infrastructure, which is not really ours, but we have to advocate very strongly for that, because telecommunications is really important if you want to run a business, and particularly when you get to rural roads, good luck. I think the satellite's the best way to have any connectivity at all. But I don't think we should ever understate the requirement for community support, community infrastructure to support the economic growth you're trying to achieve. So one issue is getting land so people can come. When they come, how to attract people to want to be in our local regional areas, and give them those basic services they actually need as if they were in a city. And we have at least around, between our basic infrastructure projects, we've got over $180 million of projects which need to be done in the next 3 years. That's just to support basic growth. There's nothing flush about that. And that's including like youth hubs and how do we keep our youth occupied, which is when you do the census on a community basis, which has an impact on the economic side of things. Youth is something that we need to address. So it's how you balance that economic growth versus the other portion. In our Shire, we've also got BP working on what would be the largest energy grid, I understand, in the country, which is around wind and solar. So we're certainly working with them in relation to all the mistakes have been made by others before. How can we not make that again when you tell you or your new community, because it will be the same size as Newman in relation to a number of people, etc. To get the economic benefits right, but also the social capital there, so that it's a sustainable economic outcome. And I think that's the thing that we can talk about profit. We can talk about sustainable profits, and I think that's really important to understand. And I think in regional, if I was to talk about, and I'll talk about energy in a minute, I haven't forgotten that question, around medical services. And I know that's a problem across the country, but certainly a really big problem in regional Australia. And if I can talk for just Newman alone, they're struggling to get enough doctors in the hospitals, in clinics, just to do those basic services, and we must fly them out into the cities to get that effect. If you were having a baby up in Newman, good luck. If you're not associated with a mining company, also good luck, because it's going to cost you 6 weeks in accommodation in Perth or Port Hedland before your baby's born. Some really basic stuff which actually underpins the economic growth that we require. With mining growing, there is definitely those auxiliary opportunities for to support the mining industry. We've been very strongly advocating for those and connections for them to come to our regions and create that economic development. And probably the other key thing, I know we're probably limited for time, so I'm trying to go through this very quickly, is we certainly take Indigenous engagement very seriously. We basically, when I came as CEO 3 years ago, we did not have a RAP, but so we wouldn't have one unless it was meaningful, and we do have a meaningful one, and we actually act on those things. We have a First Nations advisory group in relation to our projects to make sure they are, as far as we can impact, influencing what we're doing. Mining industry, if I can just say the mining industry in itself, they have their own charters and their own, they try and get the Indigenous stuff into their business and the way they do business. So we just try and supplement that as opposed to have any impact on how they do their business. So we certainly have a lot of First Nation staff, particularly Marble Bar. Our entire road crew is that. So we do that part. The other thing we do, which lends to both economic growth and culture, is we have Marta Millie, which is for those that don't know, a very famous art gallery. We run that, and essentially we have 200 to 300 Aboriginal artists that I would say run that facility. We do administration, they run the facility. And that is not just the actual centre, it's staff go out on community and they'll do paintings and all those things. So I know this is low-end economic compared to mining, but what it does is it creates an economic base for them as, in their own right, and we give the money whenever they want it, whatever purpose they need it, and we look after them. So it's they have a long, that smoothed out approach. They can grab the money when they need to have it. So we support that very strongly across all our mostly Māori communities at this stage. Near Bali, which is the main one there, they have very few people there, but Māori is a big presence. So we do that. We're certainly pushing for economic growth through tourism, and from Marble Bar through, those that don't know, it's up sort of in line with Port Hedland, I guess. So we cover from the coast to the Northern Territory border. So we're trying to promote tourism through there, which will create an economic centre for First Nations people, because camping with custodians, there's over 200 sites they can see. So we're trying to create an industry for them, because we only look after gazetted towns, but we strongly advocate for those communities and trying to get economic development for them. Yeah. So they're self-sustainable, and so we're working through with them so that we can work together, but they should be leading the project, trying to get some economic growth through tourism, which is lower than mining, I understand, but really important for sustainability.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you. A really comprehensive answer there. And I'll come back to you with a bit of a follow-up question on that last point. But Paul, I wanted to ask you as well around the ways in which your organisation is trying to foster growth and innovation in the region, but also specifically with an eye to the community needs and the importance of culture.
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. And I do just want to note, so hopefully, one of our challenges, along with many others from an infrastructure point of view, is digital connectivity. So hopefully we'll be all right. I think the creation of Deal in itself by the Northern Territory Government and Rio was innovative, in thinking about what was going to be required to help, work through a transition for mining. And so as part of those processes, we worked, for example, in the startup phases for the space industry up here in East Arnhem, so the establishment of the Arnhem Space Centre and now the work that's going on with Equatorial Launch. So, and I think it's not often considered perhaps in the context of innovation, but just picking up maybe on a little bit of what Stephen's saying, something that I think is important and really unique for us here. So the whole of East Arnhem's 100% Aboriginal land. So all of our processes and conversations about what we're going to do from an economic development point of view start from that place. And so we've got a very strong relationship and leadership by the Yolngu and Ndiliakwa people in the region who are really saying this is our vision for what we want to see. And, long histories of innovation, trade, from this region to other parts of the world. So we listen to and understand that voice, but then we also work within the context of, okay, what are, opportunities for emerging conversations in industries? And part of those for the region includes renewables and new energy conversations potentially, but it also includes, as I said, in industries like space and the expansion of those types of facilities. And from a community and engagement point of view, I'm just picking up on what, Stephen said, from an infrastructure perspective, we've still got some basics to get right always, that conversation about how do we make sure that we've got, some appropriate responses to housing and housing crises across, our region as it is for many others. How do we make sure we get roads and road services right, telecommunications services right? And then that will, at the, most fundamental, help create the conditions where we do have opportunities and innovation. We've got a whole range of emerging industries, emerging leaders from the Yolngu and Ndiliakwa perspective who are doing work in some really interesting and amazing places across a whole range of industries. So from an infrastructure perspective, how we work together to get some of those basic things right and create the conditions that are going to enable sustainable long-term economic development and growth. And so for us, that conversation always does start with going back to the traditional owners and their vision, their long stories about how they want to see their organisations, their country, their culture, continue to grow and be strong in a region like this in a post, mining future.
Yeah, thank you for that. Community engagement is obviously front and centre. Erin, I promised I was going to come back to you. Thank you to the audience for giving me the question that I was looking for. The question, perfectly worded, can you share the lessons that you've learnt in building trust and enabling the social licence with communities? And and then were the things that happened that surprised you or were unexpected in that? Yeah. And if I could, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about this, and they were talking about the challenge of local community engagement and then the sort of broader community social licence angst. And specifically the point they were making is that sometimes there's more angst from people who are further afield who don't see some of the economic benefits. And how are you balancing that?
Yeah, great question, whoever asked it. Going back to what it is that we're trying to do, it's next level infrastructure. So I know we like to, I'm an infrastructure nerd, like I'm sure people are in this room. 25,000 MCGs worth of construction site is what we're looking at for the offshore component alone. 350 metre tall towers, bigger than I call it the centre point. I think it's got a different name now, Melburnian. So this is really big, impactful stuff. And I think the first thing I would say is people in the regions can smell bullshit from a mile away. So if you go in there and try to downplay the impact that your project might have to their existing way of life, just from a physical standpoint, that trust deficit is going to go even lower than what it is that you start with. And I think something Claire said this morning that really struck me internally about creating a safe environment for people to brief up about things that aren't going well. I think in government, I'm a former public servant, I'm in the private sector now and I've consulted, but I've seen a lot of people go into communities and feel like they've got to toe the line and sort of say what we think, the government or our masters might want us to tell those communities. It will backfire. Like, it seems really obvious, but I've had many conversations with people, whether it be in the cities or the regions, about what we're doing, and being upfront and owning the impacts and not trying to bullshit people is probably advice number one that I would give. And then be prepared to sit and listen about how that impacts that person. Perhaps one example I can give is we've set up a community advisory group for our project in Gippsland. It's been running for a number of years. One of the impacted parties in building offshore wind is fishermen. We recognise that commercial fishermen have a legislated right to fish there. We've invited them onto our group so that they can hear about our studies and give us feedback around how they feel about that. There was a very tangible outcome from doing that. We have Harry, he's a 5th generation fisherman. When we told him about all of the marine studies and the research we're doing out in the ocean for our project, he sort of listened to it and he sort of quietly put his hand up and said, I don't think you've got enough data on the pelagic fish. Okay, I didn't even really know what a pelagic fish was, I have to admit, but I went and spoke to our specialists that we'd contracted to do this work, and they said, no, don't worry about the pelagic fish, many reasons not to worry about that. And I thought, hang on, Harry's been out there, 5th generation fisherman. We're going to be putting this information, all of this marine baseline study and assessment, through an impact assessment that will ultimately be scrutinised. I want to answer Harry's question before we get to that point of exhibiting that documentation. So we said to the contractors, go get some data on the pelagic fish. 5.5 extra days at sea, we got some data. We can all feel a lot more confident, I think, in the outcomes of those studies because we've involved someone's very tangible suggestion. So we're not going to get that suggestion from Harry unless we feel he feels that we're going to listen and we're going to act on it. And I would say that's helped build the trust back up. And to your question about what surprised me about that is you never know if people are going to accept you, even though you're telling them bad news. And I've found that people have been quite respectful back when they can see that you're actually trying to make a difference. There are a lot of other things at play. As I say, the energy needs that we have, the economic transformation we're going through. I think the people further afield can start to grapple with that if they feel like the people making the decisions are actually trying to do the best that they can in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, and I'm going to do the dangerous thing of trying to get 3 of you to respond to this question. So we'll see how I go. But the question is really around, I'm taking a bit out of one of the questions in Pigeonhole, which is around, COVID accelerated digital transformation. It created a new world in which people could live remotely and pursue different opportunities than we thought they could pre-COVID. And I think there's a bit of a narrative around you can get all these entrepreneurs living out there, and we've heard different stories and anecdotes about that. And I'm going to ask you first, Liz, and then Stephen and Paul, how real are those opportunities in the region? And do we need to do more, apart from invest in some digital infrastructure, but what more do we need to do to make those things a reality, or should we?
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. It's a great question. Look, it is real, and I think you only need to look to the population demographic shift. So, in the past you used to have the issue pre-COVID where you'd hear the story of, a family looking at an opportunity for employment in regional rural community, and they would have the issue of the trailing spouse who wouldn't be able to move because they wouldn't be able to continue their work. That was a real barrier pre-COVID. And the other piece that I would say about, where Australia sits pre-COVID is that we were behind globally in really adopting flexible and hybrid work. So, we've unlocked a real opportunity for future generations to optimise the opportunity of living in other places outside our capital cities. And I guess the other quick point that I would make about that is you only need to look at the cost of living and, the cost of housing in capital cities. And we know from our research and our data that 1 in 5 city dwellers want to leave because of those factors. So that's 3.5 million people who want to leave capital cities because the cost of living is too great and they cannot buy a house. And we have heard here in New South Wales, the Productivity Commissioner say there'll be no grandchildren here in this city in the next 10 to 20 years. I know it sounds extreme, but there is a real opportunity to recalibrate and reimagine what our country looks like. But we have to think big and we have to plan for it.
Yeah. Stephen, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm going to say I think COVID certainly accelerated the acceptance of remote working, but I do think it really depends on the role that those people are playing. I know in our organisation we've certainly put on more people that are not working in our office, but certain people can't handle it, to be frank. They actually need to have people around them because that's what they bounce off. And I think if it's a high energy environment, and I like to think ours was, in certain areas, you actually probably need to be there some of the time. But I do think it certainly is promoted, but, that digital connectivity that Paul's referring to and I alluded to earlier is super important. Certain, even within our own Shire, we are trying to improve the connectivity from one town to another. So imagine doing that from, say, Perth or something along those lines. So I think connectivity needs to certainly improve. I do think there's an opportunity for enhanced people. And look, I think our experience has been probably the opposite, people staying in Perth as opposed to coming to the region. Housing availability, although it may be a bit cheaper, is not probably as frequent as it is in the city. So I think there's certainly an opportunity for it, and it's certainly changed models of how people organise their business. So, yes, hope that helps.
Paul, have you seen an uptick in entrepreneurial activity, and what more do we need to do to encourage it?
There's definitely an uptick in entrepreneurial activity and interest across East Arnhem, but in our case, I think, as we've had the example of, realistically, we've got the challenge of, unreliable and inconsistent, infrastructure and services for digital connectivity, whether it's just simply through being able to access mobile and call services as soon as you get out of a kind of major centre like Nhulunbuy, or whether it's actually being able to work, in our cases, remotely in the region, with reliable, Wi-Fi or other services. So, I think the entrepreneurship's there, but if you go back to that, that conversation about both hard and soft infrastructure that's required across the region to be able to genuinely support people, be able to take that and those opportunities up. And obviously, in our case, working remotely has a very different context, than perhaps it does in a metropolitan, and suburban kind of environment. Ours is working, many hundreds of kilometres, hours across, roads and rivers and things that, don't actually allow you to easily have the services and support that you need. But yeah, it's definitely part of it. And what I think the thing that I would say is, in our case, that's why we're looking at tools that we've created in partnership with the traditional owners for investment gateway, where we can encourage, proponents and investors who are thinking about new solutions to providing reliable services, whether it's, digital or others, to come through a process where the traditional owners actually get to have a look at that in the first instance, supported by, investment territory and others. So, yeah, I think definitely entrepreneurship, a lot more work that we can do, and these conversations are great opportunities to make that awareness.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you. You all managed to land that question in a very timely fashion, and I am really appreciative of that. It's my task now to sort of weave the thread between all of that, and I think the point of asking that question, while it was sort of slightly different, was that if we believe these opportunities are real in very remote locations and closer regions, then the infrastructure piece is the critical piece of this. And I think the really strong message that's come out of this session is that it's community engagement and it's all of the infrastructures. It's transport infrastructure, it's social infrastructure, it's digital and telecommunication infrastructure, and all of this has to go hand in glove if we're going to enable the economic development and the opportunities for a whole range of communities that are going to be really important as well in terms of some of our national goals around decarbonisation and net zero. So really diverse perspectives. I really appreciated your insights, and I think some really strong messages flowing through from some of our earlier conversations as well. It is now time for lunch. I did want to remind you that at 1 o'clock we've got 2 breakout sessions. You should each have been sort of allocated to or nominated one of those sessions. If you're not sure where you're going, you can get the information at the desk. And I think there'll be room information on the screens as well as to where to head. Thank you so much for your contribution and engagement in this morning's sessions. We'll see you back after the breakout sessions. Thanks very much.